webinar for lockdown. We have these on the last Thursday of the month, 2 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, 3 o'clock Central European. The London Transport Museum, which is hosting this event, is still closed, and we've been closed for all but 10 weeks in the past year. But the good news is that we think we're opening, COVID permitting, on the 17th of May. So we have 7 weeks to wait. And indeed, the webinar in April, 29th of April, the IATM webinar, will look at reopening, and we'll look at changing customer attitudes, changing workplace, and changing city centres, all in one short piece. But today we're going to have a look at the move to digital with 2 very specific case studies. It's been such a characteristic for many of us during lockdown that with normal experience-based museum visiting not possible, we've had to move to digital means of delivering our messages and to raising our income during the last 12 months. And it's that combination of those 2 which we're going to have a look at in particular today. I'm joined by 2 colleagues, Molly Jackson, who's Assistant Director for Commerce. Molly's going to look at the previously highly commercial guided tours we did of disused tube stations, which were a big money earner for us up to March last year, and how we moved that into a digital means of delivery and to virtual tours, and are making some money from that. My colleague Chris Nix, who's Assistant Director for Curatorial and Engagement, Chris is going to demonstrate 2 of our quick responses during lockdown to building a digital audience. And we're going to have a look at the YouTube Hidden London Hangout series, which feeds off similar material to the guided tours. And then we're going to give you a quarter of an hour, 20-minute sample of a virtual tour of a disused station on the Piccadilly line, and talk a little bit about the membership and how we monetize those tours. And then Nick Winers, who's Head of Marketing and Engagement at the Tank Museum, Bovington in the UK, is going to walk us through video production, how to get started, his kind of top 10 tips. I think Nick is going to talk about how perfection is sometimes the enemy of the good, and it's just important to have a go and do it. So Nick's presentation will, I think, help some of you who are a bit anxious or a bit cautious to get over the line and get on with that. Everyone is muted, so I think we've all been used to this of the last 12 months. If you have particular questions, don't feel shy to either put your hand up at the end of one of the presentations, which we will take some questions as we go, or put them into the chat bar at the bottom of the screen, and I'll field those. And then we'll have some more general discussion at the end of the 3 presentations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand on to you, Molly, to tell us a bit about the move to digital for Hidden London.
Thanks, Sam. As Sam has mentioned, COVID has been a tremendous spur to really innovate our program we call Hidden London, which are tours of disused stations and other hidden spaces on the underground network. Until lockdown, well, we'd actually started the program probably in a very structured way about 4 years ago. The museum has been doing tours of disused tube stations for decades, but it was probably about 4 years ago we really began to ramp up the program. And by 2019-20, we were running tours in 8 different locations, usually about 3 at the same time, with 3 teams of delivery guides and all the infrastructure we needed to market and sell the tickets and operate in sometimes quite challenging spaces, these tours. So in 2019-20, we sold 30,000 tickets and made £400,000 bottom line after all costs for the museum. And that was 50% more than the previous year. And indeed, that was 50% more from the year before that. So you see, we had a really fast growing, very profitable business. And our plans were projecting that we would make this £1 million profit business within 2 to 3 years. And then, of course, lockdown happened, and that brought the shutters down on the programme, which is a really hard thing, I think, for all of us who were involved in the programme and had worked so hard to make it so successful. However, as I mentioned, COVID has been a real spur to do things we've been talking about for indeed about 18 months. We'd had a whole series of ideas about creating digital podcasts or other virtual forms of these tours. But as ever, the desire to do something really good was the enemy of anything happening at all. And we had been advised that we need a big budget to bring in the skills, the specialist skills we'd need to do that kind of work, and to invest in preparing the scripts and training and so on and so forth. But we discovered with COVID and beginning to work virtually, running the museum and managing our business using Zoom and Teams and WhatsApp and email, that actually it was possible to do some really innovative things with off-the-shelf platforms. And within less than 6 weeks, in fact, Chris will tell you more, but we'd launched our first series on YouTube, Hidden London Hangouts, which were recorded on Zoom, presented by Chris plus an ex-BBC presenter and 2 colleagues from the Hidden London team. And these appear on Saturday evenings. They're premiered live with the presenters present to host chat and answer questions, and then remain up on YouTube free for anybody to view. And since we started back in April, we've had over 94,000 views across 41 episodes. But we're also beginning now to monetize that series. So in January, we launched a membership program using the platform Patreon, which indeed the Tank Museum also use, with a series of 5 tiers with different benefits, depending on how much each subscriber pays. And we've now got 73 patrons, and they come from 5 different countries: Austria, Australia, Sweden, of course, the United Kingdom, but also United States. And we've barely really begun to grow that program or market it, but it is contributing now about £800 a month to the museum. I'm sure Nick is going to tell you a little bit more about the very successful Tank Museum Patreon program, and that provides a benchmark for us to aspire to. Having successfully launched the videos on YouTube, Chris then did a series of virtual tours to a small group of museum patrons. And we looked at these and felt that we could sell tickets for something very similar. And so by last July, we launched a pilot program of 2 different tours, and I think it was about 200 tickets. Well, we sold those out within a few hours of going on sale. And since then, we've added another 2 tours. We run 4 tours in total. And so far this year, we've sold 4,600 tickets, earned the museum in terms of ticket income almost £90,000. And these are very profitable tours to put on. We created them entirely in-house, mostly with Chris's expertise and some of his colleagues. They're hosted by 2 guides, and we only have to sell 4 of the 40 tickets for each tour to start making a profit. And for our last tranche of 1,600 tickets, we've been running at almost 90% capacity. So you can see that the margin on these tours is great. They've enabled us to reach a whole new audience. We've had people from 21 different countries joining the tours, from Austria to Romania to Israel, all over the world. And of course, those are people who, in the days that we were running physical tours, may not have been able to come to London and book a tour. We've been also able to offer them to children. For health and safety reasons, we aren't able to bring children below the age of 12 or 13 on our physical tours. And we've been able to involve people on the tours who have got mobility challenges. Most of the access to our Hidden London tour spaces are very difficult. They involve lots of staircases, narrow corridors, all kinds of issues that make them impassable for somebody with a mobility problem. And we've also been able to create tours of places that are pretty well impossible for a tour group to access. So we've been very excited about what we've been able to achieve. And as we look forward to the museum reopening next month, we fully plan to develop and run the virtual tour program alongside that. And we very much hope that our next tranche of new tours will involve a Crossrail station and network, which won't be open to the public for possibly some months yet. But we hope to be able to give people that come on our tours early access, which will be really exciting. Now, as I mentioned, all the work that we've been doing with these tours have been recorded with Zoom, using off-the-shelf platforms and the skills that we've got in-house. And I think this is going to be a consistent theme across this webinar. What we did was just try things out. Pilot has become my favorite word. If it's a pilot, you can learn as you go along. If it's not perfect, then you can thank the people for helping you make it better. But if we had gone down perhaps a more traditional route of creating this program, I doubt that we would have got very much off the ground in the time frame. Now, Chris is going to show you a sample from our virtual, from the Hidden London Hangouts, and then also from one of the tours. So I'm going to pass over to you now, Chris.
Thanks very much indeed, Molly. So yeah, as Molly said, we'd spent quite a long time thinking about how to do podcasts to promote our virtual tours. And it took the pandemic to make us pull the lever and really get on with it. In that first week of lockdown, we were supposed to have been recording the first podcast, having spent about a year working out how to go about doing it. And I was so frustrated at not being able to deliver to go and record the first podcast on site at one of our disused sites that, and having spent a week talking to people on Zoom, we thought we'd combine the two and took the first brave step. So it was 2 weeks after the lockdown in the UK that our first Hidden London Hangout was broadcast. Now, we found our way with it. We were very fortunate that we had a friend in the end from BBC who could help us take those first steps and give us a bit of confidence. But having spent the last year producing these, we very quickly got into our stride and wondered why we had been thinking about it for so long. Now, on those Hangouts, we do a lot of content. We talk about the history of disused stations, but the key ingredient to it is not being overly formal. And so the clip I'm going to show you is actually more about the nature of the team and how they interact with each other, the four of us on camera. So I'll share screen and I'll give you a minute of the chemistry between the team and occasionally a bit of content.
The of the woven fabric, aren't you?
Oh, I do love the woven fabric. You're right. I'm a big fan. Well, I guess I've got maybe two favorites. One is called Fossil, which is on one of our old bogey cars, which is in the museum, which I absolutely adore. Chris, have you got Fossil?
Can I just say, he's scrabbling around so much at the moment, trying to find a bit of it.
It's only because because seeing Chris's favorite, it suddenly reminded me how much I love Fossil. So I'm throwing a total wrench in the game here, guys. But I also love.
There's a piece of Fossil.
Yeah.
So named because of that ammonite shell there.
Beautiful. And what's the other one, Sid?
And the other one is the Route Master, of course.
There it is.
Babes.
There's so many.
So in that episode, we were talking about the seat coverings on the tube. We were using it as a really good opportunity to talk about some of the products that we sell in our shop. So you saw some of the maquette pattern face masks that are available for sale. In each of the episodes, we have our light boxes that we sell in the shop with the names of the stations on. So it's really, we're showing very nice things. We're not necessarily making it overt that, hey, go out and buy these, but we're always ready with our mugs that are sold in the shop for a little refreshing slurp. So that proved to be extremely successful in getting our fan base to beat a path to our online shop. And as the season progressed and lockdown eased, we were able to introduce on-site filming with video clips, and the team got more comfortable in their discussions with one another and how to engage with the audience. So clip I'll show you now is just one of the sort of outtake reels from one of our sessions with Patreons.
I haven't got it, Chris.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I'll try that again. It's normally a lot more slick than this, I should say. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, that looks better.
Okay. You want at least one of those, don't you, Alex?
Do you know, you're so naughty. I just looked down. I just looked down. I didn't do anything. I just looked down. You're a beast.
Why are you looking down, Alex?
Just having a look at the houses down there. Laura, would you rescue this, please, darling?
You know, I actually couldn't stop myself laughing out loud.
I like how there's a one roundel one place and then the diamond roundel further down.
Yeah, but it's all right because those guys with the saws, they'll be half-inching those next.
You know the revolving doors like you can get at a hotel?
And you both are like...
If there's an edit point in there, feel free to choose it.
Where was this photo taken? Any other offers?
We always take a bag of wet wipes. This is
not for insidious reasons, for the fact that it's very dirty.
There's a fantastic episode to come.
And so out of this was born the idea of creating virtual tours of our physical tours. And having developed this following of people online through the Hangouts, we had a ready-made audience who were keen to be able to go and visit despite lockdown. And also having reached out to a global audience with the Hangouts, again, we had a new audience that wanted to be able to come visit these stations without having to get on a plane and fight their way over to the UK. So what I'm going to do now is just show you a little clip from one of our tours, which we've never been able to do as a physical tour. It's a site that doesn't have any street access. It's a site that was on many people's list as a station they'd like to visit. And this was really a unique opportunity created by doing the virtual tours, that we could break free of only being able to do tours of stations, that it was physically possible to take public around, and opened up a much greater number of possible tours. And that place is Brompton Road, which you've probably never heard of. It's a station on the Piccadilly line, which closed very early on in the 1930s and went on to have a very interesting history, particularly during the Second World War. So this tour normally lasts about an hour to an hour and a quarter. I will give you the potted version, 15 to 20 minutes. So I will be hastening through a lot of images and trying to compress the highlights for you. So just share my screen again.
Got it.
Okay. So Brompton Road Station was a station on the Piccadilly line as we know it today, and it was built in a affluent area of London, very wealthy people living around it, in an area known as Knightsbridge. And the design of the station is one that you can see reflected in around 50 stations that were built during the Edwardian period. So between 1906 and 1907, the very early part of the expansion of the tube. And just move along. It's actually just here in this tiny area on this tube map. We'll just zoom in. Here we can see it in between Knightsbridge Station and South Kensington Station. Okay. The Piccadilly line itself runs along underneath these roads here, and these circles are showing you where the stations are. So there's Brompton Road, tucked away just off the main Brompton Road itself. And there is a little bit of it that survives today. This is the back of the building, and you can see that the colour of it is this rich, deep red, oxblood red tiling, very distinctive and recognisable pattern. So it's very easy to walk past it today and miss it entirely. We've been able to bring these tours to life using not only images of contemporary images, but also using things from our collection, like the drawings and the photos, and in some cases objects that survive in our collection. This station diagram shows where the platforms are here. The blue parts are the railway lines. So this is the westbound platform, and that's the eastbound platform. And these passageways here lead to 2 lift shafts and a spiral staircase with a passageway on the other side as well. Okay. And the all-important public house next to it. Now, this station was quite short-lived. It opened in 1906. It closed actually very early on in the 30s. We'll just move on and have a look inside it. And the reason was, as you can see here, it wasn't very well used. Not many people used it. Being in a wealthy area, there weren't a lot of people in the neighborhood who wanted to use it. And it didn't really serve any of the places like the shops or the big museums that weren't already served by the neighbouring stations. Nonetheless, it's quite a beautiful station. It's tiled inside and out. It has lovely architectural features, these lovely lights up here, the ticket windows, and the lifts which are down at the far end. We just have a look at this slightly more brightly lit image, and you can see that you've got everything that you might expect in a tube station, apart from people wanting to use it and therefore buying tickets. So its fortunes dwindled quite quickly and trains would not stop at it during certain times of the day or at weekends. It became such a common thing to hear the guards on the train shouting, "Passing Brompton Road," as the train left the neighbouring stations, that there was even a play written called Passing Brompton Road, which performed for about a year at the Criterion Theatre in Piccadilly. Now, 1934, the neighbouring station, Knightsbridge, had escalators fitted and was given a new entrance, which, as you can see here, moved close to Brompton Road station itself. And that was the point at which there was no point in keeping Brompton Road station open, and the station closed. The lifts were removed and relocated to other stations, and that could have been it. The station could have been left simply to act as a ventilation shaft for the Piccadilly line. However, by 1937, it became apparent that war was brewing in Europe, and with the Spanish Civil War, and particularly the attack on the city of Guernica and the devastation that followed there, the British government was looking for ways to protect essential services during a war, if it were to happen. And so they started talking to London Underground about reusing some of its disused stations, and particularly Brompton Road. And that Brompton Road was allocated to be used by the War Department for use as an anti-aircraft coordination centre. And this plan from our diagram shows a conversion starting to take place at this end of the station. Rooms being built on the platforms and ventilation systems being put in place to protect it against gas attack. And this is what they were building it for: a state-of-the-art anti-aircraft coordination facility for the 1st London Anti-Aircraft Brigade. When I say state-of-the-art, I really mean it, as well as the 2 diocese that you have there in the centre, where the personnel are moving the last known positions of aircraft, enemy aircraft, on that map. You have the commanders on the left-hand side with a array of telephones so that it can be in communication with all of the anti-aircraft facilities around London. But in the background, probably the most impressive part of it, there are 2 screens. The one on the left is indicating where the position of the anti-aircraft batteries and whether they are firing. There would be lights that would light up if they were actively firing. But right in the center there is a relay screen which was set up by the BBC, which is basically a television screen linked to radar. And that is showing live radar data of aircraft approaching and over London. So they had all the information there to be able to coordinate both anti-aircraft fire and air raid precautions teams on the ground to be able to deal with any ordnance which landed. So what's it like today? And this is where our tours allow you to go and see what this place is like, a privilege that very few people have ever had. There are only 2 ways to get to the station. One is to go in the driver's cab of a train and for the driver to drop you off at the station and then to pick you up the same way at the end, or to go at night on a nighttime procession when the trains aren't running. So we have just landed in this shot off the train, and we are stood just here on the map on this bottom platform, the westbound platform. And I'm going to give you a bit of video now so we can explore what it looks like today. So we're descending down now towards the track level, This wall on the right was built during the war. The wall on the left is the original station wall with its unique tiling pattern. Only Brompton Road had that colour and pattern on it. Each station had a different colour and pattern, so they were easily recognisable from the train. These cross passages were modified as equipment rooms during the war, and you can see some of the electrical equipment surviving in there. And on the floor in front of us is all of the equipment left behind by the teams that work to maintain the underground at night in those few hours when the trains aren't running. This wall on my right is the enormous brick wall that was built from track bed to ceiling to separate this facility from the Piccadilly line trains when it was running, so that this space could be used as a bunker. And there we get our first glimpse of the station name and a no exit cartouche on the wall, which were very standard features of a station designed as this one was by architect Leslie Green. Now, we're arriving now at the western end of the eastbound platform, and because this is a night time and there are no trains running, we can take a look out through these doors and onto the track. And now we'll go over onto the westbound platform through this very ornate arch, keystone above it. Through the cross passage and down these stairs onto the westbound platform. Okay, so we'll just have a little peek out onto the westbound track as well. And then we'll finish by going back to have a look at another of those station names. So during the tour, we would go on to explain how the tiling was done, who made it, and finish the story of the station being in service as a station. And then from here, we go on to look at how the station was divided up into a bunker. What I'm going to do is spring forward into the second part of this presentation, and we'll have a look at some of the bunker a bit further inside the building. So just load up and skip through. So what we've done is go from this space just here on the westbound platform, and we're going to spring all the way down the platform to here. And then, sorry, I'll try again. We've started here. We're going to go all the way down to this point here and go and explore the video up these stairs and deep into the heart of the bunker conversion. So let's see what the stairs, the spiral stairs and the lift shafts were used for. So there's an area of platform that's now full of recycled ballast waiting to be picked up and taken away by works train. But if we go up these stairs, we're pushing deep into the heart of this bunker conversion. These doors were added as part of that wartime conversion. And this used to be the limit of how far you could go into the station. When I first visited 20 years ago, when we shot the footage for this tour, this was the first time we'd been allowed to go through this normally locked gate in front of us. And we're now passing through what were several airlocks. And on our left-hand side, we see some ducting, which was added for the air handling in the Second World War. And we're now just coming towards the lobby in front of the lift. But we're going to turn just to our right and go into where the spiral stairs are, where we can see a piece of original station signage saying "to the stairs." And then our first glimpse of a bunker. This is the armory for the site where it says "danger ammunition." So we really can see now that this was a military conversion. Passageway had been bricked up there to keep the airlock. And as we go up the stairs, we start to see these platforms have been built in. And that's because the engineers had repurposed the lift shafts as 4 gun operations rooms, and they had punched a passageway through from the spiral stairs to the lift shaft so that each of those gun operations rooms could be accessed. This is gun operations room number 3, as the number suggests. And this room was full of desks, telephones and maps, and commanded the anti-aircraft units for the whole of the north of London during the Second World War. So it's filled with acoustic tiling, still has its 1930s lamps hanging from the ceiling. And you'll see here a double airlock door, one door, second door, and we're back out onto the stairs. We'll carry on up to the next level. And we're heading now into what was gun operations room number 2. And this was where the military intelligence team were based. Again, a room filled with telephones, acoustic tiling on the wall. Double airlock and the sign for number 2. And we'll now head up to the very top of the stairs. And we get to see all of this enormous air handling equipment that we saw earlier on the diagram. Through that door to the side there is where that black and white photograph of gun operations room 1 was taken. And we'll finish there with a view of the spiral staircase and all of those air handling systems that would have kept the site safe had there been a gas attack. Okay, right. Well, that's where I shall leave the tour. It's given you a flavour of how we use a mixture of images from our collection, objects from our collection, and first-person footage shot on the site to bring some of that experience of the tour to people's sofas around the world.
That's great, Chris. Thank you very much for that.
Over to you.
Shall we just pause for a few questions at this point? I guess one of the obvious questions is was that sophisticated professional video or you with an iPhone?
It was nearly me with an iPhone. It was me with an action camera that's able to handle some of the steadying of the shot, armed with a series of lights, but you know, just worksite lights, battery-powered worksite lights, because it's pitch black in there, no lights whatsoever. and then a editing machine that's powerful enough to run Adobe Premiere to edit that down into clips, and then all of that is being handled in PowerPoint. So it's really off-the-shelf stuff. It's action camera from Amazon. It's some lights from B&Q. That one of our DIY centres here. Zoom and Adobe Premiere.
Yes, other suppliers are available, as they always say on the BBC. Yeah, sure. So this is quick turnaround. Just use it. Just do it, and this isn't expensive professional video.
Yeah, that's right. And the biggest hurdle to this is not any of the production or the going and shooting it. It's having the knowledge in the first place. So it's the research which already existed within our team about the site, and having the knowledge of our own collections to be able to bring objects of interest to the presentation. So that's really it. We already knew how to do this. It's the only bit that we had to do was a nighttime of filming, and then 2 or 3 days of editing, and then it was over to training the staff. Indeed.
I don't see any particular questions or any hands up, so I'm going to ask one more. Of course, these virtual tours are to stations which it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to ever do a public tour. So you're going into places which, as a member of the public, you would never be able to go to. I'm not sure we emphasize that quite enough, because that's right. Interesting for the future too, with a mixture of virtual and real tours.
I think it's a really good point, Sam, because one of the limiting factors for Hidden London physical tours is the number of sites that are suitable and safe to take people to. As soon as we had this idea, it liberated us to open up, maybe 4 times as many sites for virtual tours as you could for physical tours. And it wasn't until January of this year that we have then started working backwards to develop virtual tours of sites where you can have a physical tour as well. So there is a place for that. But yeah, fantastically liberating, and has given Molly's team a huge amount of extra new tours to be able to sell.
Sure. I've got one question here in the chat from Nadine Schmidt. How do you advertise your virtual tours, Molly? How does the ticketing work?
So through the physical tour program, we'd actually built a database of about 80,000 people who are interested in the physical tours in Hidden London. So initially, basically, we sold the tours to people in our database. But since then, we've been experimenting with paid for social media. And this is how I think we're reaching some of our international audience. And we think as well, or are hoping, that we're doing a bit of cross-selling between the virtual program, of the virtual tours rather, and the Hidden London Hangouts. And we've also now begun to get some really nice PR, including some of the specialist railway magazines. So I'm seeing a steady trickle of people buying tickets, even if we haven't actually got any paid for advertising out there. We are setting up the tours on our standard ticketing system. So we're using exactly the same system that we use for our museum tickets and the system we use for our physical tickets. There's obviously a bit more admin because we have to contact the participants on a particular tour with the Zoom password details and so on. But also, I think there's a benefit in that because it gives us more of a relationship in many ways with the people who come on those tours. So we ask them for feedback afterwards and so on. But again, we've been experimenting a bit with this. And I should say now, actually, that we are very excited. Chris and his team, particularly City Holloway have been working with UK TV, the Yesterday TV channel, to do a programme which is called Secrets of the London Underground, which is all about many of the places of these tours, as well as our museum depot at Acton. And that's being hosted by somebody called Tim Dunn, who's got quite a following. Typically, his tours will have an audience of about his programs will have an audience of about 400,000 plus people. So again, we see that as a tremendous opportunity to do some cross-marketing and promotion of our tours.
Okay, thanks, Molly, and thanks, Nadine, for the question. Shall we move on if there are no more questions at this point? Let's go to the Tank Museum at Bovingdon, shall we, Nick? Some of the conversations that we had with you and with your director, Richard, who I know is on the call today, really early on in this process. Hi, Richard. were really helpful. You shared your learnings in the last 2 or 3 years of developing a really active YouTube channel with us that was extraordinarily helpful. So I'm delighted to have you on this call. Many thanks for your help this far. And let's find out about how you did it. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen because I've got a PowerPoint, I'm afraid, which isn't here for any other reason than to help me remember what I need to say, if I'm being honest. So bear with me a second. There we go.
Okay, got it.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you very much. My name's Nick Winus, and I'm a bit of an interloper because I'm actually from a military museum, which is the Tank Museum in Dorset, which is actually on the south coast of England, if you're not familiar with it. Now, we hold what is, in our view, the world's finest collection of tanks. We're a registered charity. We're also the Museum of the Royal Tank Regiment, which is the world's oldest tank regiment, and we attract about 200,000 visitors a year. But for the last few years now, we've been pursuing a very active online and digital marketing and digital engagement strategy, because quite frankly, we wanted to make ourselves more famous. And what I'm going to be talking to you about is how we got started in this, particularly on the YouTube side of things, which is where we've been most active and where we've applied most of our resources. And in these top 10 tips, I suppose, for getting started, I'm going to be covering the kind of things that I think everyone should be thinking about if they're thinking about getting stuck in to online video in the way that we have. So first of all, why use video? We've got a YouTube channel. It's got about 332,000 subscribers now. We're certainly the largest military museum in the world in terms of subscribers, and we're one of the largest in the world in terms of views. And basically, video is the easiest medium to consume. It's far easier to consume video than it is to read it. Video also allows you to explain pretty much anything, including quite complicated and complex subjects. And of course, it's fantastic for storytelling. And as museums, we all have fantastic stories. It's in the very nature of what we do. And when it comes to sort of setting our standards, when we got stuck into video production and started taking our growth of our YouTube channel really seriously back in 2016, rather than looking around other national museums for how they were doing it and emulating their processes, rather than that, we actually looked at other successful YouTubers and looked to emulate what they do and how they do it, because of course they're the people who really dominate that particular medium far better than brands and corporate organizations like museums do. And of course, as you can see, I'm a big fan of YouTube itself, but YouTube is absolutely huge. It's the second biggest search engine in the world after Google. And in fact, of course, Google owns YouTube. So the two are one and the same thing. And most Google searches will index content on YouTube anyway. It's got 2.3 billion users worldwide, making it an absolutely enormous platform. But of course, it's not available in certain countries like China. 1 billion hours of content are viewed on YouTube every day. That's a phenomenal amount of time spent on this platform, and 400 hours of content are uploaded to YouTube every minute. And 90% of people say that they've discovered new brands, products and services on YouTube as well. So it's a very active platform. And certainly in my view, it's certainly something where I think all brands should seek to be. So when you're getting started, it's really important before you dive in and switch the camera on to really get a grip and understand what it is you want to achieve out of doing this. So is it a case of you want to make yourselves more famous like we did? Is it that you want to better engage a community of enthusiasts in your subject that already exists out there? Is it that you want to make your information and your collections or areas that you have access to, as Chris was talking about earlier, more accessible to the public? Is it that you want to increase traffic to your website or increase or support your revenue raising activities? Or is it because you want to seek new ways of offering customer support? And of course, the reality is you can achieve absolutely all of these. And that's certainly something that we are either doing well now or well on the way to delivering these things. And by way of example, what I'm able to show you here, and I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor. Can you see that at all? So you can see what I'm pointing at. Excellent. Okay. So this is basically the performance of our YouTube channel last year. And this is the number of views that we were achieving on a daily basis throughout 2020. What a memorable year that's been for all of us. So last year in total, we achieved 16 million views. So clearly we're ticking that box in terms of our desire to become more famous. And we generated 2.8 million hours of watch time, which I worked out to be about 320 years. So we're certainly engaging a community of enthusiasts in the tank-related content that we're generating. We also grew by just under 80,000 subscribers. And we also earned revenue out of our activity on YouTube. And what you can see here is the money that was earned through advertising on the YouTube platform. So for us, that's a completely passive income stream. And my goodness, hasn't that been useful after the year we've just had? But you can also track the progress of your digital followers. And what you can see here is a couple of screens from our online shop analytics that shows which social media sent traffic to our online shop. And here you can see that in all of 2020, we had some 42,000 visits from YouTube, and also how much those visitors spent. So our YouTube, our customers that originated from YouTube generated just over £37,000 for us. And like all good museums, certainly in the UK, we were all obsessed with making these videos after the first lockdown to explain to our potential visitors what would have changed since the start of the pandemic and how their visit would be different, but also what we were doing to ensure their safety during their visit. So that's a way of delivering that kind of additional customer service and reassurance. The second thing you need to do is, and it's obvious really, is define your target audience and identify exactly who it is you want to speak to. So for example, you might want to think about who they are, where they are, what language they speak. That's quite an important one on YouTube as well, which is predominantly an Anglophone platform. How old they are. You will also want to consider the things they have in common. In particular, that means really what interest they actually have, because all of these things will define what it is you should be saying to them and how you should be going about saying it. And by way of an example, I don't expect there's many of you in this audience that would have heard of this this title here, World of Tanks. This is a video game. And it certainly was 3 or 4 years ago, one of the leading free-to-play online video games. It's called World of Tanks, and it's played by millions of people worldwide, and it already had a well-established online community. So when we started getting really serious about our intentions to grow online, this for us was a very obvious audience to pursue. But it also meant that our target audience had a certain set of obvious characteristics. Obviously, they were video gamers. Also, obviously, they were quite interested in tanks in one form or another. And then a proportion of those would also have been interested in military history. And those are the ones, of course, that we were most interested in. But because they were video gamers, it also meant that they were more likely to be male. And it also meant that they were more likely to be under 35, which is also quite key in terms of how we go about communicating with them. But the other benefit, I suppose, of the massive worldwide World of Tanks audience was its global nature, which almost made the potential reach for what we were seeking to do a very, very, very large pool of people indeed. The next thing you need to do is define your niche. Now, I know many of you aren't natural English speakers on this call right now, so you might actually not know what a niche is. So it's probably a good idea to start by defining that. So a niche is basically something you hear talked about in marketing an awful lot these days, but a niche is a focused, highly targeted area that you can serve particularly well. Basically, if your focus is too broad and too general, the risk is that you don't really end up pleasing anyone. And the better you define your niche, the easier it will be for your audience to relate to you. The other important factor to take into account when using YouTube in particular is it's a very big space, but it's also a very busy space. You also want to make sure that what you're doing isn't already being done by other people. You need to find a unique angle, because ultimately that will help you stand out. And that's really why you need to define your niche, because you need to find that point of originality that makes you different from what other people are doing. Now, by way of example, the much of sort of defining a niche can mean matching the talent you have to the task at hand. And by way of example of that, one of the most popular series of content that we deliver on YouTube is our Tank Chat series. And here in the image, you can see one of our historians, that's David Fletcher, stood in front of a tank, literally just talking about that particular vehicle. And you can see it's had 181,000 views. That video dates back to 2016. Now, of course, for many people, they probably can't imagine anything more boring. But if you're a tank enthusiast, this is obviously going to be right up your street. Now, what's important to remember as well is David, the presenter of this particular Tank Chats episode, is somebody who's had plenty of experience in the past doing guided tours of the museum, doing interviews for documentary series. So he's somebody who's very comfortable appearing on camera. He's very good at it. He's got a very unique and engaging style of delivering that information. He's got a very dry sense of humor. And the audience absolutely loves it. And they absolutely love listening to hear what he's got to say. He can be quite withering, for example, in his descriptions of things and politics sometimes. And that's the other really important thing to remember. YouTube in particular does tend to be quite personality driven. So the viewer likes to have a relationship with the presenter of content in a way that perhaps they don't have with typical linear TV media, for example. And as a result of that, it can lead to other ways in which you can monetize your presence on the platform. So, for example, I'm pretty sure that our David Fletcher is the very first curator in history to have his own line of branded merchandise. So the other thing you need to do then is think carefully about the platform that you're going to be using. I've been talking a lot about YouTube, but of course other platforms do exist. And the platform you choose will really very much define the conventions that you need to use when you're creating your content. By way of explanation, Facebook does accept video. The videos that perform better on Facebook tend to be slightly shorter, whereas the average length of a video on YouTube, I think, is between sort of 8 to 12 minutes. On TikTok, which is a relatively new and trendy hip platform that I'm sure you've all heard of, you can't actually upload a video which is longer than 60 seconds. And of course, you can also upload video onto Instagram, Twitter, and embed video into Reddit as well. One of the key sort of changes and developments in the online landscape in recent years, as I'm sure you're all well aware, because you've all got one, is the smartphone, and that dictates conventions quite a lot as well. So there's two reasons why. Because we're too lazy to turn our phones sideways when we're taking films, for example, a lot of these newer platforms do actually tend to lean towards the portrait film film style, and TikTok is of course one of those, whereas on YouTube the filming style still tends to be the traditional landscape version. But also an increased number of people are consuming their YouTube content on mobile phones as well. I think it's about 70 or 80% of people are consuming their content on mobile phones, and that also means you need to consider a couple of other things, because not all smartphone screens are particularly high quality, which means you need to make sure you're not filming anywhere that's too dark. And it also means if you ever put captions on the screen, They need to be quite large, otherwise people quite simply won't be able to read them. And the other thing with smartphones as well, of course, is the speakers within them tend to be quite low quality. So unless people are using headphones, unless your sound quality is really, really good, they're going to find it very difficult to hear. And things like that will, of course, stop people engaging with that content very quickly. The next point, and it's something we've touched on already, when you're getting started in this kind of thing, you quite simply have to use the gear you've got, not the gear you wish you had. And I'm going to show you the contrast here between $1 million Hollywood production and the reality of what somebody with 1 million subscribers on YouTube has. You can see today's modern setup for reaching an audience of millions is far more simple than the golden age of Hollywood in the 1940s. You can see there's a crew of goodness knows how many people there, shining lights and all sorts. The reality is there are people making very, very good livings on YouTube now who just have a computer, a ring light, a very basic camera, a very basic microphone, and a computer. And that's literally all you need. And if we're all being honest with ourselves, this right here is the YouTube starter kit. You can get started on a smartphone. That's literally all you need. That's how the London Transport Museum have got started. And that's how a lot of YouTubers and TikTokers who are themselves celebrities have got started as well. So another example from the Tank Museum to show that you really don't need the best kit to get great results. This video here is actually one of the first videos that I filmed and edited for the Tank Museum YouTube channel, although this one goes back to 2012. And you can see it's had just under 2 million views. But the gear I filmed it with is certainly not the kind of gear that we're using today. The gear I used was a camera that looked very similar to this one here, just a very simple digital handy cam. I found this particular one you can buy on Amazon for $47.99. That doesn't necessarily mean it won't fall to pieces as soon as you get out the box. I think the one I was using was probably only about £120 though, so it wasn't a huge amount of difference. And the editing software, very basic and very affordable, that I used to stitch it together was Adobe Premiere Elements, which of course is available for just under £100. There are also free and open source alternatives available, and a number of computers. So a lot of the Apple computers, for example, all include a very basic video editor on them when they ship. And that's all you need, really. You don't need anything more than that. The key thing, of course, is the content itself. So the next thing is all about actually getting on with it and getting it done. And sometimes that can be the hardest part. And the danger is overthinking it. You just need to get it done. But you do need to have some form of plan. You need to know what you're going to say. You don't need to overthink it or be too clever, but you do need to decide some of the basic things like, are you going to have a more conversational style like the London Transport Museum approach, or is it going to be more of a scripted lecture style, or is it going to be a bit of a combination of both where you just kind of ad-lib in front of the camera? You also need to think who is going to be doing that presenting, and honestly ask yourself whether they're actually any good. You do need to be good on camera. You need to be fluent in your speaking. You need to have a good turn of phrase and be interesting to listen to, or obviously no one's going to tune in. But the important thing to remember is you don't have to do it. You can find other people to do that for you. And that's something that I'll talk about in a moment. You also need to figure out who is going to shoot it, because it's difficult to be both behind and in front of the camera at exactly the same time. Now, not everyone has camera people on their staff, and we didn't initially either. However, one of the things that we've done recently, which is something which is technically available to all of us, is we formed a relationship with the local arts university and their film production qualification. And we've now got an internship at the Tank Museum, which is paid for out of our Patreon earnings, which is something which was mentioned earlier. And so we've got a well-qualified but inexperienced young camera person who we're able to give a fantastic work experience opportunity to the moment they graduate. You also need to think about when and where you're going to be filming the content. And what I mean by this is you need to think carefully about, the noise. If you're in a noisy space, that's not going to be good for your sound quality. You need to make sure that you're not going to be filming in a place or at a time when you'll be disturbing your visitors. You need to consider things like making sure there's plenty of natural light so it's not dark. And it always helps if there's something really interesting looking in the background as well. Now, here's an example of some of the content we had to pull together during lockdown. As we've already mentioned, the pandemic has sort of brought out the best in all of us, really, I think, in terms of pulling some interesting things out the bag. Obviously, the lockdown came, we couldn't film the kind of stuff that we were normally able to film. And we also had sort of an urge to find new ways of making money as well. So we came up very quickly with this new YouTube series, which was, as you can see, the Curator's Q&A. So we'd ask members of our already quite well-established YouTube audience to fire any questions they liked at the curator. And here you can see the curator is appearing in one of those videos. He's responding to the questions. He actually filmed that himself. You can see even more novelly when he's not in the Tank Museum at all. He's actually in his own back garden. Which is quite interesting. And you'll also notice that he's surrounded by products that we sell in the shop. And I have to say, we took a far less subtle approach to our product placement during this Curator's Q&A series, and we were quite crass in the way that we said, hey, buy stuff from us, we're struggling at the moment. And you can see there's some of those products around there on the table, but we did soften it a little bit, in the sense that, as you can see, David there is responding to one of the questions that the audience asked from one of the books that we're actually selling in the shop. So again, that was an excellent way of signposting our viewers to support the museum financially at what was a very difficult time for us. Now, I said earlier that you don't necessarily have to be the ones who appear on camera for your organization. And here is an example of one of the other YouTube series that we run on our channel, which is called Top 5 Tanks. It's a very simple concept. We ask people who are interested in tanks, of course, that has to be a qualification, who have got a significant online following of their own, to come to the Tank Museum, and we make a video of them explaining what are the favorite 5 tanks in our collection and why. And here you can see we have 6 examples. We've done a lot more than that. Interestingly as well, about how international our reach has become. Only one of these individuals is actually British. That's Al Murray. He has quite a large podcast, which he co-hosts with the historian James Holland. But we've got an Austrian, 3, 4 Americans, and another American who happens to live in Sweden. Indy Nidell is the host, or was the host, of the Great War Channel, which is a very, very big YouTube channel. Military History Visualized is a very big YouTube channel based out of Austria. Beyond the Brick is a huge Lego YouTube channel based in America. Sophie is one of the World of Tanks community contributors with her own big Twitch following. And the History Guy is another American YouTuber, and Al Murray I've mentioned. So you can get these people to appear in videos for your behalf. And of course, the benefit is that they bring their audiences to your channel to see what they've got to say. And doing these videos has really helped grow our audience as well. So the next bit, of course, is the hard work, really. It's the editing and the upload. And what you can see here is basically what your average editing software looks like. The key thing, I think, when you're filming is to keep it simple, to minimize the amount of editing you need to do. But a little bit of editing will always make your output a little bit more attractive and more interesting to watch if you can cut in what we call B-roll, which is, wide shots while somebody's talking. It's not just a talking head on the camera the whole time. And as I've said, there are free and cheap alternatives out there. You don't need to have the top of the range stuff, just the kind of stuff that people can buy off the shelf in PC World for editing their home movies is more than adequate for what you'd need. And then when you've actually got the software, there are a whole pile of free to watch YouTube tutorials about how to edit video. So it's you'll soon realize, even if you've never done it before, and I hadn't, it is super easy and super quick to get hold of. The other thing to bear in mind, though, with editing is you've got to give it time. It is a very time-consuming process, not least because you've got to watch what you filmed. You've got to watch it through numerous times by the nature of doing the edit. But there's also a sort of a benchmark to work through. They say that for every completed hour of finished content, for every completed minute of finished content, it will take 1 hour to edit, which is something to bear in mind. So once you've uploaded your video and it's got out there, it's of course very important to keep an eye on how it's got on, make sure it's hit the right spot, make sure the audience are responding to it in the right way, and of course making sure people are actually watching it, because of course if people aren't watching, you have wasted your time. So there are numerous ways to measure and monitor how your video has gone down, and I can give you an example of some of those, but the key ones are of course views, likes and shares, comments, viewer duration and watch time, but also these days with YouTube analytics in particular, you can get a really good idea of exactly who that audience was as well. And I'll give you an example now of this particular video that we released recently, which was a video about the models in our tank collection, tank models in a tank collection. First of all, what you can see here is it's a little graph that shows 18 days after release how many views that video has had cumulatively, and you can see that when we first released it, it didn't really perform as well as some of the better videos on our channel did, but interestingly over time it has performed slightly better than average, on the basis that it wasn't really being watched by our current subscribers, but actually because it was about a slightly different subject, in other words, making models, YouTube uses its very powerful and at times scary algorithms to find new audiences for it. And you can see that the payback in that is that that single video gave us almost 500 new subscribers, and 14,000 more watches than usual, and 2.2 thousand more watch time than usual. YouTube also tells you exactly where your audience was, and this is actually pretty standard for our channel. Normally, the proportion of viewers in the UK and the US are very, very similar. And again, that's why our online shop has been so important to us, because we're able to, people in the US really aren't likely to be able to jump on the next plane to come to Bovington to see us anytime soon, but they are able to support us through Patreon and through our online shop. And as you're probably not surprised to see, the Anglophone nations are well represented there as well. Germany is 4.6%, and then after that we tend to see those Scandinavian countries, and also Holland and the Netherlands and Belgium as well. And you can also find out the age and gender of those who are watching. Unsurprisingly, our audience is overwhelmingly male. And normally it's in this age bracket, but perhaps because of the subject matter of this particular video, which is talking about model making, which tends to be a hobby which is enjoyed by people who are more senior in years, we have a slightly older demographic. So the next tip is about building your audience. So everyone starts at zero when they're starting out. Everybody, even the biggest YouTubers, they all start with zero. And I guess there's an opportunity to be seen in that, because it means you have got the space to make mistakes without an audience who's going to be massively disappointed or let down by what you're doing. It gives you space to experiment, to sort of tap into that niche, to find content that your audience is going to really like and really respond to. But it can be quite daunting nonetheless, starting at zero. And also, of course, storytelling is at the very root of this. You need to be making good content. Well, what does good content mean? Well, from my experience, good content always has the following characteristics. First of all, good content from a museum has to be authentic. Now, that shouldn't be any problem for organizations like ours, because as museums, we are the holders of this knowledge and this information. Authenticity is very much in our DNA, as is storytelling. We also have a responsibility for accuracy and for getting it right. That goes without saying. It should also be original. As I've said before, there's literally no point going out there trying to copy what other people are already doing, particularly if they're already doing it very successfully. It needs to be useful. And by useful, I mean it needs to fulfill some purpose, and education is a good enough purpose as long as it's interesting. And it needs to be simple. And everything that we do, if you take a look at it, is pretty simple when it all comes down to it. There's nothing particularly earth-shattering going on there at all. But the other thing, which is really important, is consistency. And what consistency means, it's not just about making sure that you're posting something often. So we always post our videos every week on YouTube, but that is really important in developing an audience, so they come to expect that you're going to be putting something out there every week. It's also consistency in terms of what you communicate, how you communicate it, and, if you like, in the style you communicate it, because these are all things that your audience will kind of hook onto and get attached to. And if you start playing with those conventions too much, they will switch off and drift away. It's also really important to continue interacting with your audience as well. And in crudest possible terms, this means, you know, reading the comments, reading what they say about you in the videos, responding to them if they ask you questions, and giving them opportunities to participate, if you will, in what you're doing. So whether that's asking them for suggestions or asking them for content ideas, for example. The other important thing in building your audience is signposting it. And what I mean by that is making sure that in all your offline channels, you're making people are aware of the online channels that you have. So making everyone who walks into your museum aware that you have, for example, a YouTube channel is really important. Putting it in your emails is really, really important. Putting it on your Facebook is really important if you want to drive people to YouTube as well. And the other thing that we've had considerable success with is partnerships and collaborations. YouTube is naturally a collaborative medium. The audience really likes it when two of the YouTubers they like work together. It, for some reason, is a source of immense amusement to them when they see two YouTubers working together that they follow independently. And that's something that we've used to great effect. But again, the community that we were able to target wasn't one we had to build. It already existed because of this online video game world of tanks. All we've done is just expand it around the edges to appeal to people who are more into history. And the final tip of the 10 is to rinse and repeat. This is a learning process. We're still learning. We still have to adapt. There's changes all the time. There's changes on the platforms. For example, one of the issues that we constantly face and have to be concerned about is how companies like Google and YouTube react to what they call shocking and potentially offensive material. Now, we're talking about history. History has elements of politics in it. There are symbols, there are weapons, there are all things which Google can and will red flag if we're not careful. So to mitigate that, we have a YouTube partnership manager who we basically have online, but it's not been unknown for history related, perfectly respectable history related YouTube channels in the past to have content blocked because a machine has identified that it has something in it which could cause offense or may be politically sensitive and basically block that video. And of course, the whole while you're doing this, you'll get better at it. You will evolve. But the key thing is even at the beginning when it's very, very difficult, is to keep going. So thank you very much. I think that's brought me to the end of my top 10 tips for getting started. I don't know if I've got time. I have got a short video of how you can also use videos in here, but like I say, I don't know if I've gone on long enough. The video itself is about 3 minutes, but if not, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nick. That's really brilliant. I think I've learned a lot from that. Let's just see if we have any questions, and if not, we'll roll the credits with your video. Otherwise. I can't see any particular questions on the chat. There was, as you were talking, Oswald was talking about DaVinci Resolve being free editing software that was available. One of the things I'm interested in is, I know you make a lot of use of partnerships, and how do you avoid the Tank Museum's brand being kind of lost in a kind of mega YouTubers world?
I think because of the kind of organization we are, we don't have big bucks, we don't have big money. Without sounding too silly, I think people understand why, if they want to work with us, they understand why they're doing it. They're doing it to help out, you know, a military museum and a registered charity. So I think we come into it with quite a lot of goodwill, and we don't behave like, you know, we never behave like the bigger partner, if you know what I mean. So I think that dynamic is actually quite important to it.
Yeah, sure. Are there any questions from Molly or Chris for Nick?
think the other thing actually, which I probably should have pointed out a bit more, you say Da Vinci, there are free versions of this software. There's actually quite a lot of free stuff available for not-for-profit organizations that not a lot of people really know about, because these companies don't really shout about it a great deal. But for example, not a lot of people realize that Google offers a lot of its platforms for completely free for not-for-profit organizations. Like the entire Google G Suite is completely free for not-for-profit organizations, and a whole range of other software producers will do a very generous NPO rate if you just ask for it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thanks again for the help that you gave us when we were teetering on the edge of treading into Patreon, and just wanted to talk to somebody else who'd done it. And it's surprising how few people outside of the kind of hardcore YouTubing world use it. And we thought that there's surely no reason for a museum not to be doing this, and the other people that we could find who were, and it was just really helpful to chat that through and you know, find out from what you'd learned from it how best to set ourselves going.
Okay, Nick.
Absolutely. So thanks for Nick. And I really like what you had to say about partnerships. And I know we've started conversations about some things that we might do jointly. I know, Chris, that you've worked with other transport museums for sort of guest appearances on Hangouts, and that's been great. Just ways of reaching new audiences and just learning more, actually.
Yeah, I think the key thing is what Nick said about when you're thinking about setting up a show, think about the presenters. So if you're going to do a collaboration, make sure that spend a lot of time talking with the person who's going to join you. Make sure they're a good fit with what you're doing. And I know that we did a collaboration with the New York Transit Museum recently, and Polly, who came onto that, was just absolutely fabulous. Clearly had watched some of our shows, and so knew exactly what she was letting herself in for, and joined in with the spirit of it. So yeah, it was great to be able to share both of our audiences, but it does rely on having somebody who's a good fit.
Yeah, I think sorry, cutting in there. So it's worth saying that sharing audiences is an incredible way to grow. And we found the experience of working with other YouTubers is they bring their audience to us. And it's interesting, Sam's comment about do we get swamped? We dream of getting swamped. If we get onto normal TV, we love the fact that normal TV would take us to a huge audience because it increases our audience, and it's exactly the same on YouTube. And what we found is that they end up this wonderful pattern where eventually, if you get big enough, they want to share your audience too, and then you can grow really quickly. So we found the absolute key we found was this collaboration with people who already have an audience, and that really accelerated us quickly.
Yeah. Okay. There aren't any more comments on the chat function, so I think what we might do is do our thank yous and sign off, and then we can roll the credits with the video, Nick, if you like.
Sure. Yeah.
What I wanted I wanted to thank Molly and Chris and Nick for sharing so much intelligence with IATM today, and I urge you all to share this video when we put it out on the IATM website with your colleagues. We meet next in a month's time on the 29th of April, when we're going to have a look at the business of reopening, and we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at what are our customers thinking about as they come out of lockdown and start to think about visiting museums once more. We're going to look at the nature of city centres and how they're under threat and are changing around us very visibly. And we're going to look at the world of work and begin to think how that is going to be different in the future. And your guess is probably as good as mine on that. So we hope to see you and many more of your colleagues in a month's time. So many thanks for our friends from the Tank Museum for their help putting this one together today. And we will roll the credits and finish with a video. So over to you, Nick. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you all. So yeah, the video I'm just going to play now is, if you like, what I consider the pinnacle of our sort of video achievements, and what you can achieve when you finally get up and running. You've got your team together and you can start using your own in-house resources for advertising, so you don't have to pay anybody for it.
This enormous tank behind me is the 69-ton King Tiger tank. For many people, this is the tank that's the epitome, the height of German tank design in World War II. And this particular Tiger is captured in Normandy by British troops. You can actually see where they were firing. There's 75mm guns in it. It's not much effect.
There you go. I expect you all want to visit now.
Oh, we do. I just can't quite get used to seeing a museum with visitors in it.
They were all members of staff.
Yeah, that was great. It's really, really nicely put together. Yeah, thanks a lot. That's superb. Thank you, Nick, and well done, Richard. Thanks for that. Much appreciated.
And we're going to have to think of a way to have an inflatable tank shell on the Hidden London Hangouts.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get you on too. I've already got the tank linked.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks a lot.